Hi there, I'm Danny Flex and welcome to the latest edition of Seconds Out Live. Delighted to be joined by Mr. Ayman Khan. Ayman, you're another year older, I believe. What's going on? What is it now? 22, 23?
Oh man, it's 33. I'm feeling the age. You start getting the grey hairs. They come here, then they go here, then they go here,
Everywhere.
and they go here, and let's stop there. And
Yes,
yeah,
please.
so I'll be rivaling you for that grey hair
Right.
dad guy. That's it.
Just grey
Monitor.
dad guy.
That's one. Grey dad guy soon enough, but happy to be here nonetheless, even if I am getting up there in age.
It'll be Seconds Out Live with the grey dad guys, plural, before you know it. It's kids that make it go grey quickest, mate, so don't worry. Until you start popping out sprogs, you'll be all right. We are here not just to talk about our advancing years, you'll be glad to know, but also about the goings on in the boxing world. And as you'll probably see from our headline on the thumbnail and so on, we are talking about Anthony Joshua and his search for an opponent worthy of a big fight, given that Tyson Fury, at least for now, is quote unquote retired. We are the most interactive show on boxing YouTube, so please do get your comments and questions in. We'll get through as many of those as we can. I'll go to the chat in a minute. Give us a thumbs up if you haven't already and become a Seconds Out subscriber if you're not already one of the lucky, well, I was going to say few, but we're over 800,000 now, so I think few's gone by the wayside. So Gary Mail says AJ's probably looking at Foreman. He doesn't say which Foreman. Yuri Foreman, perhaps. Matthew Woodward says Wilder. Naveed W says Daniel Dubois, I assume he means, or Bacoli are still winnable fights for AJ. Cuss's System, good to see you, Dennis, says AJ now looking at legacy and not money as Fury retired. So Dubois has to be the next and go for a third world title, cannot hang around. Y Dollar Shine says all he needs to do is versus Wilder. That's it, then retire. MB says Fury is only retired to increase the offer. Turkey will make him come back. The fight will happen. Beautiful Golden Dragon says Grey Dad Guy and Capote back on the horse. We got a horse each. We've treated ourselves. Rod Brown says, try a Bacoli, grow some balls and fight the one no one wants to fight. Instant cred there. And Thunder Road says, good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started with a thumbs up. Thank you, Thunder Road. Thanks, guys. No, really appreciate that. And yeah, a few names mentioned there. Kind of the ones that have been talked about most. Deontay Wilder, a fight that was talked about a lot more during their primes when AJ reigned as a unified world heavyweight champion. Deontay Wilder had that WBC belt for many years. But Wilder is, of course, coming off two back-to-back defeats. Anthony Joshua off a one-sided drubbing against Daniel Dubois, taking some of the luster away from that fight. But there does still seem to be some interest in it. Someone else mentioned Martin Bacoli, who put out a tweet maybe a week or so ago saying that it's kind of been agreed that there'll be a fight between him and Joshua in Africa, and asking Turkey Al Sheikh to make that happen, which would be interesting as an event. You know, Bacoli has often been on the high risk, low reward end of the scale, but a big money fight out in Africa, the first Riyadh season or Ring Magazine event out in Africa, that could make it worthwhile for Joshua to take that risk against Bacoli. And is Bacoli, and you know, Billy Nelson, don't hate me for this, is he being slightly overrated after the win over Jared Anderson? That's something we can get into. But no one seems to be talking about Dillian Whyte anymore. Was it because of the laborious performance in his comeback fight against Ebenezer Tete? Is that why it's gone quiet? I'm not sure. But I think that's a fight that could still be sold as a bit of a dark horse from me. Maybe a AJ Jarrell Big Baby Miller fight as well. Now, I know going against Miller, he'd be going against the guy who lost to the guy that he also lost to in Daniel Dubois. But there is beef between the two of them. Miller's had a good performance since the Dubois fight in that draw with Ruiz. And I'd like to see them come back together and actually get the fight over the line this time. We know why it didn't happen the first time. No fault of AJ's, of course. But I'd still like to see that. And we know what him pulling out led to as well. So it could be said that the drug test failure from Jarrell Big Baby Miller affected Anthony Joshua in a negative way, perhaps even more than it did himself. But again, that's something we can get into. So, Ayman, first of all, if we assume that Fury will stay retired by the time that Anthony Joshua wants his next outing, who would you like to see him fight?
I think for me, Joshua's career pretty much hinges on, and his standing within the fans hinges upon him fighting a live contender in the similar vein as to what Daniel Dubois has done, not giving away who I think he should fight there. But Deontay Wilder doesn't stand to be someone who's a contender on the rise, burning up to be one of the fighters of the next generation to take over from the likes of Usyk and Fury and AJ. I think AJ, for him to really say like he's still here, can still hang around in this generation and at the top end of the heavyweight division, I think he has to come through one of those, but he still needs a little bit of management from that sort of end, because these young guys seem to be very hungry. On an ideal path for AJ, you might figure that he would fight someone like Fabio Wardley, but they're in the same gym, and I think that crosses out that possibility that will happen. So I look at someone like, as you said there, Jarrell Miller, still got life in him, still can sell a fight, won't be opposition who would really damage AJ in the ring. You'd think AJ would be in as a heavy favorite there, but he'd still test him like he did test Daniel Dubois. There'll be some moments AJ has to come through to show what desire and ambition he's got. Filip Hrgović is someone I think as well too, who's been out of the ring for quite a while. Not heard a peep from Filip Hrgović since his loss to Daniel Dubois, but Daniel Dubois had to get through him to get to his world title opportunities and to get to Joshua. I think that makes sense for someone who, look, he's only had that one loss on his record. Aside from, a lot of people think that and I do think he did lose to Zhilei Zhang. I was there ringside for that one. But outside of that one official loss on his record, can take a shot and can give it back as well. So he's pretty much at that fringe type of world level, and Joshua gets a win over him. And I think people will consider Joshua to be back and ready for another big opportunity down the line. Otherwise, maybe, and I know we do, you mentioned there as well about the possibility of going back in with Dylan White. We all love a little bit of nostalgia, so let's get into some nostalgia. Dylan White stands as a possibility if we can get licensed to return with Andy Ruiz, the trilogy against Andy Ruiz. Where is Andy Ruiz right now? I'm not too sure, but if Andy Ruiz wants a big fight, one that he can get up for, one where he feels like he let an opportunity slip by, that's something that I think would sell quite well. Another one being, we all keep hearing about the rumors and whispers, and I think the more than just rumors and whispers of a return to the ring for Vladimir Klitschko. I think that was the lift off for Anthony Joshua. If that was the lift off, then it was he's had quite a few crashes down, and none more so resounding, none more so recent than the one against Daniel Dubois. So maybe the relaunch of Anthony Joshua, the third time this time around, is needed, and it can go against a former foe that lifted him off in the first place against Vladimir Klitschko. And then, of course, we've discussed here before in previous weeks the possibility that we finally get the form of Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder in the ring. I think it would be entertaining. I don't think it would be. I wouldn't write it off like how Dan Raphael did, especially in the UK here. I think Wilder doesn't hold as much currency as AJ does have over here, as Wilder does have in America. But that's something that when it comes to Fight Week, I'll be very much interested in tuning into. So I think those are the options there for me. I think Hrgović stands up as a real top of the list, as does someone like a Wilder or a Klitschko too.
Andy Ruiz right now. I had to stop myself from shouting Taco Bell or something similar because A, fat shaming is not cool, and B, I have to remind myself I'm not the slimmest guy myself these days. So yeah, Andy Ruiz, I don't know where he is, but I hope he hasn't left boxing for good, because he is always in entertaining fights. Chris Essex says Turkey is making the Wilder fight for May, he said on TalkSport. DB Cooper 1 says, what's next for AJ? My parents' garden could do with a new wall. Put those bricklaying skills to use, AJ lad. Yeah, I'm not sure you'll be able to match purse offers with some of the other options Joshua's got coming up. Rod Brown says, got more respect for Joshua in the fights where he was KO'd. He kept getting up. VKMMFU LSB, he's really got to change his handle. Says, hi, is Danny Flexen on this stream where it's either me or I've been cloned? So, yeah. MB says, Wilder is shot to pieces. Nobody wants to see this fight. Yeah, I mean, I guess they'll go with whatever's likely to generate the most interest and financial recuperation. But is it recuperation? Recompense? Whatever I'm trying to say, I think you've got the idea. I don't particularly want to see the Wilder fight. I think that Wilder's two performances, because they went a number of rounds and because it was in back-to-back fights, you can measure his decline pretty clearly. Whereas with AJ, yeah, he got dominated for a few rounds against Dubois, then wiped out. But he didn't look like a shot fighter. He looked like he got his tactics all wrong. He looked like he made a terrible mistake in the moments before the knockout blow landed. But you can look at his fights previous to that, and while albeit the opposition was nowhere near as good as Dubois, you can still say, well, he's got those fundamental skills. He doesn't look like he's lost the step. He's still quick, still powerful. We're not sure we can say any of this about Wilder. He hasn't troubled either of his last two opponents with the power. He hasn't even got in position to land those big haymakers. So that is a bit of a concern. And so I think it could end up being a mismatch. And AJ probably does need a confidence builder, but you need someone coming in my view, with a bit more credibility than this current version of Wilder. DB Coupon says, get AJ a fight in Africa. I want to see Danny Flexen get malaria. I don't cover shows, DB Coupon. What are you on about? You must be crazy. You must have malaria. He says, for the lols, boxing's very own Cheryl Cole. Brilliant. I'll go by Tweedy or just Cheryl, just Danny. Beautiful Golden Dragon says, Andy Ruiz's barber is in Lewisham. Shout out Nigel, the style surgeon. Okay, good to know. Rod Brown says, why at his age after defeat by Dubois are you trying to find soft fights for him? This has dogged his legacy all his career. I just think from his point of view, having taken that brutal beatdown against Dubois, him and his team will not want to bring him back in a really tough fight. But yeah, I mean, if I'm wrong on that, then fair play to them. VKWM Few LSB says, Joshua has been carefully managed throughout his career. Povetkin was old and never a world champion, just had been dropped by pride. I mean, he was WBA champion, albeit when there was a super title in existence. Parker didn't throw a punch. Klitschko, yeah, but that's not AJ's fault, in fairness. Klitschko retiring, gassing, coming off a loss. Yeah, I mean, I don't think AJ's win over Klitschko should be held in high regard. I think it actually underlines some of the flaws that have always been in Joshua's makeup, but that's maybe a story for another day. Cuss's System says, Hearn has said it's all about legacy now for AJ, has probably 2 fights left. So in my opinion, has to go for a third world title. Winner of Dubois versus Parker. If he wins, final fight Bakole in Africa. I think Bakole is more likely to be entertained as his final fight if he loses against the winner of Dubois Parker, but let's wait and see. Brian Petrov says, Eddie Hearn did a brilliant job of keeping AJ away from Wilder's right hand until Wilder is shot. Aged him out, as they say. DB Coupon says, I've always wanted to see AJ versus Miller, right or wrong, the fight we never got. Yeah, so that's the one I suggested earlier. Big Baby Miller, we all saw them going at it verbally and a bit of a push and shove, bit of a push and pull, as Carl Froch would say, and he loves AJ, we know that. At the press conference before the fight, before Miller flunked his latest drug test, although he's been clean since, as far as we're aware, he's in 24/7 VADA testing, I believe, and hasn't fallen foul of that, and still looks a half-decent fighter. You know, he gave Dubois a pretty good test before Dubois came through, and then for a lot of people, they felt he was hard done by against Ruiz in that draw. So, yeah, I mean, I would like to see that, not just because it's the fight we never got, but because that's the narrative, and he's still a decent test for AJ, who's coming back, trying to put his confidence back together. You want someone where AJ will be a bit of a spicy build-up, and he'll be angry, and he'll be aggressive. That's what we want to see. So I think Miller's a really good shout. Now, whether he'd be allowed to box in the UK under the British Boxing Board of Control, I'm not sure because of his checkered history. But we'll have to see if they agree to fight. I'm sure they'll sound out the board first of all. Where are we? Zumbanu Love has joined us. Good to see you, sir. It says AJ's best wins are Old Vlad, Parker, and Povetkin, which is very similar to what who was it? VKENN Few LSB said. Furies are less old, Vlad, Wilder, and Chisora. Yeah, I mean Fury, Dillian White at the time he fought Dillian White, I think it's an underrated win as well. Zumbanu Love, both were champs for a while. Is that resume good enough? I'm not sure. The Bringer, I think this is, says Bakole would whoop them all. We shall. Hopefully he'll get his chance to prove it. It's FA Jagba next for Bakole. On the Bakole fight, I think it's too risky a fight for too little reward at this stage of Joshua's career. The next fight's incredibly important. If he's, the nature of the defeat against Dubois was incredibly dominant for Dubois. AJ needs to win and win well in his next fight to give him a chance at that top level again, not just in terms of, commercially getting the shot, because he'll always get a shot. He's AJ. But in terms of rebuilding his confidence, where people are actually giving him a chance to win and get that third world title. So I don't think it's going to be Bakole next time out. And if I was his team, I wouldn't be looking at him. As I said, I'd be looking at either Miller or Dillian White, because again, inbuilt narrative, they fought twice, win a piece, one as an amateur, obviously in White's case, and AJ stopped him in what was an entertaining fight earlier in their careers. White didn't look amazing in his comeback fight against Ebenezer Tete, and that's probably an understatement on my part. But he would surely get up for, both in the gym and on the night, a Joshua fight, a Joshua trilogy, if you like, more than he did Ebenezer Tete in Gibraltar, of all places, although I know White's got a bit of a soft spot for Gibraltar. They created a coin in his honour, after all. But yeah, I'd like to see Joshua against White again. Loser must retire type of fight. It's a fight that AJ could go into with confidence, I think, but he'll still get up for it. He won't want to lose bragging rights to one of his historically biggest rivals. They can get on, and then if AJ comes through that and looks impressive doing it, gets the stoppage, then he can go on to that third world title shot. VKNN Few LSB says, WBA regular is not a legitimate world title belt. Each body has one marquee belt, hence super only required to be undisputed. Clever marketing. It sounds better than interim/silver, but no different. Yeah, but bear in mind, when David Haye had the WBA belt and he was going into the Vladimir Klitschko fight, it was made to seem like it was maybe not on a level pegging with Vlad's belts, but it did have some respect attached to it. Jibril Ajani says, fuck it, I'll fight him. Okay, Jibril, get in touch with us offline, and we'll pass your details on to the Matchroom matchmaker. DB Coupon says, I honestly think AJ shouldn't fight anyone but Fury. Only exception is a Mega Riyadh season fight in Africa. Michael Thompson says, White is absolutely shot. Would be relatively easy work for AJ. Chris Hudson 258 says, Flexen versus Edwards. We were actually in the same room at the weekend in Nottingham, but there were no trash talk. I think that ship sailed, to be honest. And I'd be a bit embarrassed because he's so much smaller than me and I probably still couldn't land a glove on him. VKWM Few LSB says, stick Joshua in with Bacoli. It would be entertaining and atmospheric. Should it be in Africa? He'd be bludgeoned, though. Who would be bludgeoned? I'm assuming you mean Joshua in this case, but perhaps not. Zambanu Love says, let's just hope Dillian White keeps clear of contaminated supplements, either him or his dog or any other sources for his other failed tests. We'll have no Dillian White dog slander on this episode or any episode. Dondo62 says, AJ should be the one retiring, not great boxers like Tyson Fury, who, by the way, in my opinion, beat Alexander Usyk. It's a minority opinion, but an opinion nonetheless. Okay, Usyk moved about a lot and looked busy because Tyson Fury was the aggressive one. We're not going to rehash that argument on today's episode. I'm not going to say on any episode this time, though, because I'm sure it will come back. Rod Brown says, by the way, great active channel, you guys. Interesting stuff. Kudos to you. Thanks, Rod. Please stay for the rest of the show in a sign of your gratitude, and we'll say you're welcome if you do. So Ayman, if you had to pick between White and Miller, who, similar stages of their careers perhaps, both got history with AJ, both marketable fights, one American, one British, one perhaps closer to the exit door than the other, who would you go for?
That's a tough question because they both have history. One in the form of 2 fights in the amateurs and in the pros, and one in the form of a failed fight. So they both sell it, and in their own way. One fighter is probably more. Miller's probably got more in the tank than White does. I think what pips it over the edge for me is that we haven't seen Miller and Joshua. I think for Joshua Miller. So having not seen that before, I'd want to see that. And I've seen White. And I know that kind of flashes in the face of, for many, the hardcore audience who'd want to hear me probably say, we don't want to hear. It's a bit of a rock and a hard place because they both have, I guess, spotty histories in terms of testing and things outside the ring. So it is a difficult one.
Maybe they should fight each other.
Potentially, that's something they might do, and they're both then be in line for.
Sponsored by VADA. Just kidding, guys.
I think Miller. We haven't seen that fight, so I'd like to see Miller of the two get that opportunity.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. VKNN Few LSB is educating me in the chat. He says Danny Haye had the WBA heavyweight title, and the regular/super split wasn't brought in until Klitschko beat him. So fair enough. Povetkin was the first WBA regular belt holder. I get confused. I'm getting old. What can I tell you? Chris says, what about the forgotten Michael Hunter? Very good point. I mean, Billy Nelson said in an interview with us a few weeks ago that Hunter's been offered the Bacoli rematch a number of times since he defeated him. And that has come together for whatever reason. Billy obviously implied that Hunter didn't take it, but I'm sure Michael would have a different story. And he's not been on great form recently, Hunter. I mean, he's not been losing or anything, but he's just not been fighting in prominent on prominent stages or against well-known people. If that changes, I'm sure he can get back in the mix. The Bringer says, do you boxing analysts, that's a whole different podcast, feel that the Saudis will give Ngannou another shot at another top 10 heavyweight? It's an interesting question. I think we can divert to that briefly. I mean, what was his record at heavyweight was that he got a very contentious decision against him versus Fury and then got wiped out by Joshua with a shot that probably would have knocked out a horse. Not that boxers are allowed to fight livestock. A horse is livestock? I suppose they're not. You don't sell them for food, do you? Anyway, going off on a tangent there. But Ayman, what do you think? Do you think Ngannou has got a big enough name and did enough in the boxing realm to warrant another shot?
There's no solid or easy touches in the top 10 of heavyweight boxing, I feel, especially when you contextualize that with putting Francis Ngannou in the opposite corner. I think Francis is a very capable fighter. He showed that against Tyson Fury, but I think you have to be honest in the conclusion that wasn't Tyson Fury was fully focused and fully fit for that fight. I think Fury thought that he was going to just dance his way through it and then had to turn it on in style once he was dropped. I think Francis, I'm not calling that a flash in the pan. He's earned his merit in losing a close decision to Tyson Fury and saying that he can compete, but you have to prove that it wasn't just a flash in the pan. And against someone in the top 10, they all pose different problems, even some that don't have as heavy or conclusive power like anti-Joshua's. Think of someone like Otto Wallen, who's going against Derek Chisora very soon. Otto doesn't carry that big, heavy power, but he's a problem in himself. And Francis, I don't think, has ever had that experience in the cage or in boxing. Fury to a degree, but it's a different sort of style completely. I would say the top 15 or somewhere outside of that is somewhere where Francis Ngannou should look first before then trying his hand back against some of the higher level, because I think he needs to know that he can compete at a high level and get a win and then move into trying to break down that top 10 bracket.
What about Francis Ngannou against Fabio Wardley?
No. I think that's not a competitive match either for Ngannou. Right now, Wardley's got a massive gust of momentum about him, and Wardley just goes from the off. As soon as he sees an opportunity, he just goes for it. I think Ngannou would need someone who's a little bit more passive early and a lot less concussive in his punches. And he needs to get a win over someone of that ilk. I'm trying to come up with a name in my mind right now. I can't quite think of anyone off the top of my head, but someone of that ilk would be best for Ngannou. See if we can get the victory and then move on to something like that.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see if you can think of anyone after we've been through the chat. Kissian Mutu says, repping AJ for life. DB Coupon says, very, very Christmassy jumper from Ayman. I guess SO is having its annual Christmas party tonight at the end of January at the local Subway. Do you mean underground tunnel, or do you mean the actual sandwich shop? Either way, I can confirm we're not. Ayman's still in a celebratory mood from his recent birthday. Kissian Mutu adds, we need to see AJ versus Dubois. AJ needs to get it right this time. Dondo62 says, AJ was and never has been a professional boxer. Look at his arm positions. His left arm is locked out and he jumps backwards. I've never seen a boxer doing that. I mean, he was an Olympic gold medalist and a world championship silver medalist. So, I mean, yeah, maybe you think he was only ever an amateur boxer then rather than a professional, but, you know, he did win his world title pretty quick and unified and won it back after he lost it. Kissing Mutu, oh no, he just said repping AJ for life again. We got it the first time, but appreciate the support for him. Red Black Titchy says Fury versus Dubois would be interesting, but I question that Fury would be in shape. DB Coupon says, I'm 100% certain that Billy Joe Saunders has fought livestock in the past on his farm. 100%. I'll be sure to check. I'll be sure to check if that's true. I know didn't he have a bare knuckle fight with that heavyweight from Hatfield? And apparently got the better of him, even though he's much smaller. That's a rumor that's been going on. Well, sure, I asked Billy Joe one time and he did confirm it. But anyway, he's not livestock, so it's irrelevant to this conversation. VKWMFU says Michael Hunter has done nothing since he drew with Povetkin. He lost to Artem Suzlenkov. That was essentially a pro fight that wasn't recognized as such on BoxRec in April 2024. And then he follows up by saying, is there any chance of getting Kevin Barry interview prior to Dubois knocking Parker out? I think you've already spoken to Kevin Barry about that fight, haven't you, Ayman?
I've spoken to Kevin Barry, if I remember correctly, briefly about it. It would be good to get something a little bit more in depth. Kevin was busy over the Christmas period. I sent him a Christmas message, and he was sure to say that we'll get something in the pipeline very soon. So I'm definitely in the mind frame and going to be acting upon getting that over the line for you guys, so you can hear Kevin's take on that big heavyweight clash.
Beautiful Golden Dragon says, what do you think AJ's issue is and how can he fix it? Is it all in his head? That's something we'll discuss in a minute. Legend27 says, Parker's going to knock Dubois out. Styles make fights. So it seems like there's a bet in the offing here between VKWN, Few LSB and Legend27. We're happy to broker it here at SO Live. We want 10% of the take. Dondo62 says, Ngannou's an MMA fighter, not a boxer. There's an exclamation mark there. It's making a joke of the sport. Another exclamation mark. If he wants to box again, question mark this time, mixing it up. Let's make it interesting. Another question mark. Ngannou versus Jake Paul. 4 question marks this time. So question marks wins the day in the internal battle against the exclamations. There's a fight everyone would want apart from Jake Paul. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about Francis Ngannou against Jake Paul, but I think it'd sell, as would either of them against Conor McGregor, I'm sure. VKWN Few LSB says, fantastic regarding Ayman beats Kevin Barry. I hope to hear a good 30-minute interview with Kevin. Cheers. Yeah, what's wrong with AJ? Is it all in his head? Ayman, do you want to take a swing at that one?
Spoke to Robert Kraken, actually. He was at the launch press conference for Jonas versus Price, and I put it to him directly, and I see this every now and again from hardcore boxing fans. They say that they feel... I know we ran a poll, didn't we? And a lot of people, at least the Seconds Out listeners, felt that Joshua was in the form of his life, but I always see this every now and again. Boxing fans feel that he was at his best under Robert McCracken when he was going forward, high guard, and just going for that knockout, trying to get that knockout from the off, destructive version of Joshua that we've heard of. And Joshua has since changed up his style a little bit and boxed a little bit more, tried to be a bit more honed within the craft of boxing, as opposed to just going ho for the knockout. I think for me, and like Rob McCracken was saying, that you've got to just discount the Dubois fight as heavyweight boxing, and that he was caught with a punch, couldn't recover, and had a very brief moment of success, reverted back to type in a way, and went for that knockout, and then got knocked out himself. Part of the blame has to be down to the coaching team for the instructions. Part of the blame has to be down to himself as well. He's an experienced head himself, and sometimes that might mean that you go against some instructions sometimes, and you account for yourself in that moment. I think some of the things that have been said about AJ in terms of his vulnerabilities are merited, in that he takes a shot and then doesn't quite know how to deal with it, really. And it's almost the start of the end once he does take that big shot. There's only been, at the highest level, there's only been a couple occasions I can remember of where Josh has really handled those moments. It's more the more high profile highlight reel moments that we remember where he's really just capitulated. So Ruiz, that first fight, sort of was able to navigate it, but then it just fell apart. Joshua, the same sort of, Dubois, I keep getting the names mixed up. Dubois, most recent, we saw what happened there. Even to a degree against Alexander Usyk, but he did come through it towards the end, more fatigued than anything, but he was on the ropes, and but for another minute, maybe Usyk would have got out of there. I think those sort of vulnerabilities and frailties and composure seem to be a little bit of a problem for him. Desire, I don't know with Desire, really. When it comes to some of the off-record conversations that I've had with Anthony's team, I should say, sorry, they always say that he's wanting and willing and wants to prove himself that he can win a world title again. He has the desire to do it. He doesn't lack ambition to get there, and he knows that he'll have to face whoever. He's happy to face whoever it is. I think sometimes as well, again, when it comes to off-record conversations that I've had, Joshua does make some ill-advised moves as well too. So that Usyk fight, the first time round, would anyone really have begrudged him if he didn't take the Usyk fight?
No.
He could have vacated the belt, and that would have been a different route to to an undisputed fight of his own or a world title fight of his own. I mean, turns out he would have probably had to face Usyk anyways because of where Usyk went to undisputed. But hearing that he wasn't fully fit, and boxers are never fully fit, but he had an injury that would say like you probably advised not to fight the first time around. You know, these are some of the things that when you look at it again, maybe you'd have changed some things around. But because Joshua wants to fight and doesn't want to give himself any excuses, that what leads me to think that desire and ambition isn't it isn't something you'd question about him. I just think the truth is, when it comes to it, he's fought fighters that just been better than him. In Dubois, he was outgunned. In Usyk, he was outthought. And those are two areas where he himself does hold those factors as a boxer. In he is good in those elements, but he just fought two fighters that are better than him. Maybe the Dubois fight is caught a bit cold, and there could have been a lot more. There could have been better preparation for it, expecting, in particular, with turning up to the fight 45 minutes before the bell was to ring, or at least they were going to ring walk, whatever. But I still think for me, Joshua still can contend at a higher level. Maybe mind frame is a factor to it. Maybe a little bit of comfort is a factor to it. But he can also still put himself in positions where those aren't as much of a factor. And with Ben Davison, I don't want to slight Ben Davison here. And I think Ben Davison will prove and has proven to be a good coach. But putting that to a side, he's also in an environment where he's got young and hungry fighters in and around that gym. Whether they mix as much, I don't know. But I would think that he's also competing with other heavyweights that have desires to get world titles. And that's a good place to be in. So I think recently it's just a case of heavyweight boxing. And the AJ package that was presented to you in the first place with Hearn shouting through the rafters was sold and bought by boxing fans as gold. And it's not quite gold. And now you're realizing AJ wasn't what he was sold to you as, but he's still very, very good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, before we move on to segment 2, I want to put out this week's poll, and we'll read out the results at the end of the show. So you've heard us discuss who we think Anthony Joshua's fight next. We're asking you the same question. Should it be Dillian Whyte? Should it be Martin Bakole? Should it be Deontay Wilder? Or should it be someone else? And if you pick other, please do comment in the chat who you're picking. And we'll read out, as I say, the result at the end of the show. But we should talk about something big that was announced last week, because we're still waiting to hear who AJ will fight next. And that's the undercard for Chris Eubank Jr. against Conor Benn, which is set for the end of April at the Spurs Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, which is all very exciting. But the undercard was probably a little bit better than I was expecting. I thought they'd probably spent so much money on the main event and acquiescing to those two boxers' demands that they wouldn't have much left for a strong support. I'm actually pleasantly surprised with what we've got. Just to give the rundown, I think Modfather Vinny is going to put it up on screen, hopefully. He says 2 secs. Come on, Vinny. All right. But yeah, so we've got Aaron McKenna against Liam Smith, which is a kind of youth versus experience, classic crossroads fight. Cruiserweight fight, which I'm very excited about. Vidal Riley, fresh off the fallout of his fight with Isaac Chamberlain, which beat not too long ago. Really good fight there. What are the other two that have been confirmed? Chris Billam-Smith, coming back from that defeat to Zurdo Ramirez, takes on Brandon Glanton, a big puncher from the US, who I actually spoke to about an hour and a half ago. And he's determined to win. He thinks he's got it in the bag. And I hate to say this, but probably the one I'm least excited about out of the three, the trilogy that not many people were asking for, but maybe Ayman can put me right. And that's Anthony Yarde against Lyndon Arthur 3. You may remember that Lyndon won the first fight on points, very close. A bit of a, underwhelming performance from Yarde. And then Yarde burst out in the rematch and gave Lyndon a bit of a hammering, it's fair to say. And they've both had kind of mixed fortunes since. I know Yarde's had a lot of inactivity because of promotional issues and so on. Ayman, first of all, as a whole, what do you make of it, and which fight are you most looking forward to?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Danny. I think this card, and from what I've seen as well, has come under some unwarranted criticism. yeah, you could always want a little bit more. And when you've undercards that have been a lot better filled with quality of fights than previous years and previous offerings from promoters, you can absolutely want more and want to see promoters better themselves. But I think for the standard of the main event and then filling that out with undercard fights, I think this is really, really good. I think this is good fare. I can't quite remember off the top of my head all the fights that were mooted for the original iteration of Eubank Jr. versus Ben, the Sons. Um, but this stands to be, for me, a lot better in quality. Outside from all the fights, what sticks out to me is probably, I mean, they all have that element of interest here. I think Liam Smith and Aaron McKenna is a very intriguing and fun fight as well. Liam Smith, some question how much he has left in the tank, and then with McKenna's were those Hennessy prospects. He picked both the McKenna's brothers up, and Aaron was always heralded as the one who would go on to do big things, and Stevie, they thought would kind of go along well as well. But then in the program, Stevie kind of ran ahead and Aaron sort of filtered back a little bit. And Stevie's now faltered a slight bit. Aaron is still in there and he's in tough now. It's a now or never. It's a big scalp for him. If he beats Liam Smith, then I still think that's a good version of Liam Smith that he beats. But he's in tough against Liam Smith, I feel. Crispin Smith versus Brandon Glanton, you just know that's going to be a attritional, tough affair, and both fighters are going to come out bruised and battered, and it'll be a real rocky type of affair in that fight. Vidal Riley versus Chevron Clark, real intriguing type of matchup. Vidal Riley, for me, unfairly gets labeled with the YouTuber boxer type of tag. Doesn't deserve it. Has won titles in the game, which means that there should be no doubts about his credentials. But there will certainly be no doubts about his credentials if he beats Chevron Clark with his Olympic background. Chev lost a tight decision, shouldn't have lost a tight decision in the sense of he should have been beating his opponent for the European title, but he didn't. And now has an opportunity to redeem himself on a big occasion. Yard versus Arthur, sure, I agree with you. And there's been nothing to say that there's an outpouring of excitement for Yard versus Lyndon Arthur. But for me personally, I really like Ante Yard as a fighter. I find him exciting. I find him fun. I find him engaging. And he could have been in against such as the tail of Yard's career. I think this criticism is warranted that he does go up and down a little bit in terms of the levels of opponent and interest. So you might have seen Yard in with another European type opponent where it's just another run out, a blast out for him. And that's not that. That's Lyndon Arthur. And so there's that thread of intrigue. We've seen this before. We know what to expect here. Yard knows how to beat Lyndon Arthur. Yard, from his perspective, only lost to Lyndon Arthur because there was a lot going on in the background. So if those noises aren't going on in the background like they weren't in the second fight, then I fully expect to see a repeat of the second fight. Coupled with that of the desire of Lyndon Arthur had gone on his social media and effectively said, look, I'm retired, but for the anti-Yard fight, that's what's going to get me up for something. But what are you up for here? Are you up for the payday, or are you up for kind of chalking up a win column in the trilogy? I'm not too certain that it is that. I would like to hear that from Lyndon Arthur to say that he really wants to avenge that defeat to Ante-Yard. But other than that, I think it's a real good offering for the Eubank Jr. versus Ben undercard.
So what are the chats saying? We got Thunder Road says the undercard is underwhelming. I see what you've done there. I only rate Vidal versus Chev Clark. I mean, is that partly because you're not au fait with some of the other fighters, or you are au fait with them and you don't rate them? It'd be good to know which it is. Rod Brown says, seriously, this Parker pump of late is such a boring revisit. I hope the Wire KOs him and we can get him right. MB says, I'm fine with that undercard. There's 3 good fights there. Don't know much about Glanton. Brandon Glanton, he was kind of being built up as this undefeated knockout puncher at cruiserweight. He was, who was it? Oh, Pro Box TV. He was appearing on there. And then he came up against David Light, the New Zealander, and the winner was going to get a shot at Lawrence Okoli. David Light got a contentious split decision on that card and then went to fight Okoli, and he got completely beaten out, not beaten out of sight. He wasn't like stopped, but he got decisioned. Meanwhile, Glanton ended up in Okole's training camp sparring him for the Chris Billam-Smith fight, which obviously didn't end well for Okole. Although Glanton was telling me today that Okole was seriously weight drained during that camp. So something to keep in mind as he progresses through the heavyweight ranks. But yeah, so Brandon Glanton still got that power. Good fighter, determined, sparred some of the best in the world. You know, Noel Mikhalian at cruiserweight, Okole. Went in with Beterbiev quite a number of years ago now, obviously down at light heavyweight. So serious operator. But I think it's more about what Billam-Smith's got left. I saw him at the weekend. I was in Nottingham for the Dalton Smith main evented Matchroom show, and Billam-Smith was there supporting Ellie Scotney, who had put on a masterclass in her win over Miyamoto. And yeah, Billam-Smith, speaking to him, he told me a lot about what causes cramp. You've really got to speak to him about that. He gets quite enthusiastic. But yeah, on that subject, he still seems very fresh, very just generally motivated to continue with his career and get back to that top level. Glanton's rated in the top 15s, and I think the top 5s of 3 of the 4 or 2 of the 4 major governing bodies and top 15 of all of them. So it's a good route back for Billam-Smith, who's still got decent world rankings himself. The winner of this could easily get a world title shot on another Riyadh season show. So I think that'll be, as Ayman said, a real interesting and grueling war of attrition. And then you've got Liam Smith against Aaron McKenna. Aaron McKenna was with Golden Boy. I don't know if they've still got any interest in him, like in terms of, you know, do they co-promote him or have they got him fully or whatever. But yeah, he's always looked pretty clinical, but not really been tested as yet. Liam Smith will certainly test him as long as we get the Liam Smith of old rather than an old Liam Smith. We don't want, you know, him to struggle with injuries during camp. And this is something that happens more as a fighter gets older, and struggle to make the weight as a result as well. If he comes in kind of peak condition, I think it'll be a huge test for Aaron McKenna and maybe even a step too far, like when we saw Anthony Fowler step up against Liam Smith a number of years ago. It's just whether that Liam Smith is still there, can still be summoned for those big nights. So that's 2, you know, decent fights, I would say. But the one that really excites me, and I've criticised the Yard Arthur one enough, and Ayman agreed. But the one that really excites me is Chev Clark against Vidal Riley. I think they're both exciting fighters. They both pack a lot of power. They're 2 of the best kind of fresh cruiserweights in this country. Obviously, we've got the likes of Chamberlain and Billam-Smith and the kind of slightly more experienced, more seasoned. And I'm aware that Chev Clark and Vidal Riley, Chev Clark particularly, isn't a spring chicken, but he is fresh in the professional game, was a real class amateur. Vidal Riley on a domestic level, no, you know, bad amateur in his own right, and much more than just a YouTuber. He's looked very good as a pro so far. I think he's English champion, British champion now. And then you've got, him against, I know Chev Clark's British champion and Vidal's English, I think. I have to double check that. But yeah, really good kind of style match, I think, as well. And just not one we were expecting, not one that would have been made without Riyadh Season or Ring Magazine shows, because one's with Boxer and one's with Matchroom. And now we get to see it still in kind of close to the peak of their careers, which I think is great. So look, Ringwalk Boxing Podcast says Wilder needs to be this year. This is against Anthony Joshua. We've got a poll about who should be Joshua's next opponent. Please vote. He's 39 years old. No need of him fighting much later. Rod Brown says AJ on the defensive back foot isn't a good look. I think he just hasn't got an adequate defense for a great fighter. It's his weak point, in my opinion. Nat says great performance and win at the weekend for Ellie Scotney, despite her, according to Billam-Smith, weak calves. Yeah, well, so ask Billam-Smith about that. You know, that was an off the record comment. VKNN Few LSB says agreeing with Rod. Can't wait for Dubois to knock out Parker, and hopefully the paint dry Parker hype will die off. A lot of hate for Joseph Parker in the chat, for someone who's such a nice guy as well. I'm not sure he kind of warrants this level of enmity, but you know, we shall see what happens in February. But yeah, going back to the undercard, Ayman, who are you, obviously first impressions, but who are you picking in the 4 fights?
Okay, I am picking. What concerns me and what tips me over the edge to pick Liam Smith over Aaron McKenna is, I remember when McKenna fought Ulysses Lima at Your Call, and that was a real tough, grueling affair as well, from someone who had a bit of pop and power and came forward and just fought with McKenna. And McKenna came out that fight with a lot of credit and got the victory, but he came out bruised and battered. And I think Liam's obviously levels above Lima. And I think his experience in those moments is going to tip him over the edge, and I think he might end up closing out a late stoppage against Aaron McKenna. If not, I think points is probably the safer bet. Yard versus Arthur, with respect, outside of speaking to Lyndon Arthur and knowing where kind of he is in terms of his ambition, I've got to go with Anthony Yard here. I've got to go with a repeat of what happened in the second fight in that sort of fashion. Then moving on to Billam Smith versus Brandon Glanton. I don't know what Brandon Glanton can do to not make it an attritional affair, because that's also his style. And those sort of styles and those sort of fights outside of Zurdo Ramirez, Chris Billam Smith always seems to find the way to just drain his opponents and make it his type of fight. And I think that's the way it'll go. Again, a distance grueling type of fight. And then last fight, Vidal Riley versus Chev Clark. I think Chev's the one who's got more to prove here than Vidal Riley, to be honest with you.
The expectations are a lot higher from the start of their careers as well. I know you mean more recently, but
yeah, absolutely. So I think the pressure is all on Chev, and that pressure might tell on the night. I've just got this feeling about Vidal Riley that it's just the timing's right for him. This is his moment. I thought the timing was right as well too for his fight against Isaac Chamberlain, and now an even better opportunity against a fighter who's got, I guess, hasn't had the wear and tear that Isaac Chamberlain has had. But I just think it's his. I think it's Vidal Riley's moment. I think that might be a points victory for Vidal Riley too. So those are my immediate takes.
So I agree with 3 of the 4. I'm inclined to go for Chev Clark against Riley. I don't know. I just think this is make or break for Chev after what happened last time out. And yeah, there will be a lot more pressure on him, but I think he performs pretty well under pressure. He's been in those big GB international tournaments, and I would like to think this will be a breakout performance for him, and that he'll get the job done. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if it went the other way. But I agree with you on the rest. I think Aaron McKenna, he's not Jaime Munguia. And, I think it'll be a similar type of fight as it was between Munguia and Liam Smith, except Liam Smith will come through this time. But, McKenna's still young enough to come again. And then you've got the trilogy fight. Yeah, I mean, I fancy Yard to win. If he's the same Anthony Yard he was before the extended hiatus, then I would expect him to get the job done pretty, not comfortably, but pretty explosively. I think it's fair to say. And then Chris Billam Smith against Brandon Glanton. I've only watched maybe one fight of Glanton's, that one with David Light. So maybe it'd be unfair judging him. But you've got to back Billam Smith as a world-class performer, former world champion, looking to get his career back on track outside of the very best in that division. So, Jai Opataya and Zurdo Ramirez, who, he beat Billam Smith and it was fairly clear, but Billam Smith had his moments in that fight. You've got to expect him to come through, at home or close to home against Brandon Glanton. So, yeah, I agree mostly with Ayman. We might have to have a little side bet on the the domestic cruiserweight fight. I had a bet on the NFL playoffs with John Evans. So John Evans, a boxing writer who's working for The Ring over the weekend in Nottingham. But we often talk about NFL. We're both big fans. And we had a bet for the 2 championship games, NFC and AFC, but we got one right each. So no one's got any money. He did say afterwards we should have bet on aggregate score, which would have had him well ahead. But, he didn't ask for it before we made the bet. So sorry, John. You're unlucky. Right. It is now 4:51. So it's my usual extended hiatus of my own, with all due respect to Anthony Yard. As I've got to drop my son off at the kickboxing gym. And if he's very lucky, I'll leave him there. Guys, I'll be back in 10 minutes, but Ayman will be here to hold the fort.
Absolutely. Just before I jump on into the next topic, which is the 140 friendly topic for a little small prompt to Vinny, I'll just jump back into the chat. I'm not quite sure as to where Danny left it, but I will just make a couple of comments. Rod Brown says, seriously, this Parker Pump of Late is such a boring revisit. Hope the ball KOs him and we can get him right. We'll see. I think that's a very tough fight there for Daniel Dubois. By no means is it a case of where Parker's just going to capitulate at the first shot. It was a tough fight for Joe Joyce in himself as well, until of late where he just got caught with something big and just didn't have it left in the tank to get back up. MB's fine with Undercard. I think that was said before as well. I agree with you. Ringwalk Boxing Podcast. Wild needs to be this year. 2025, he's 39 years old. No need of him fighting much later. Yeah, I don't know if there's that sense of urgency from Deontay Wilder himself. It seems more the sense of urgency to get out of the sport with taking substances which changed him and looking to be lesser of the bronze bomber, even though we heard that he's back and back to the destructive force. But we have not seen that yet in the ring. And the latest iteration of Deontay Wilder against Zhilei Zhang was not one of a destructive, back to his best type of form. Rob Brown also offers AJ on the defensive back foot isn't a good look. I think he just hasn't got an adequate defense for a great fighter. It's his weak point, in my opinion. Yeah, I think any great fighter would hide and mask their vulnerabilities, and that's what Robert McCracken had Anthony Joshua doing for his part in his career. High guard, keeping it tight, leaving the gambles to the side, being risk averse by coming forward, by closing distances and not letting big, wide shots, big, wide hooping shots come in and exposing any weak points that he did have. AJ's gone, even though he's boxed a bit more, he's found different shots and found shots that would leave him more open for a man of his frame. It's a lot, he doesn't quite have the speed to get back to cover the defensive area, the area that he's left vulnerable through his gap in defense. And I think those have cost him in fights, maybe not conclusively as it did do in Dubois, but they all add up like in the Usyk fight, although he was still very good in the second fight against Alexander Usyk. That says great performance and win of the weekend for Eddie Scotney. I think that was mentioned as well by Danny. Can't wait for Dubois to knock him out. How that was mentioned as well. And what winner of Zhang versus Ajit Kabiel? I think that is for Anthony Joshua. Not a bad shout, but I think those two, or the winner at least, will be looking at getting gold around their shoulders very soon. Even though they would get a lot of money, they might have title aspirations of their own. Although both of them, I mean, Kabiel has history with sparring Anthony Joshua, and Zhang has called out Anthony Joshua for a number of years. Parker hasn't knocked anybody out of note. His stamina is also questionable. Look at how low volume it was versus Wilder and Zhang. You never know. Looking forward to the fight. It's not too long away, less than a month away as well. So looking forward to that fight. Vinny, if you can queue up 140 friendly, and that is the latest iteration of 140 fights this weekend. Super lightweight Dalton Smith took on Walid Uiza, and look, at European title, Dalton Smith looks to be very much on the ascendancy towards getting world title honors, but this Walid Uiza just wasn't competition for Dalton Smith, and part of that is to do with how good Dalton Smith is as a fighter, and part of that was to do with how subpar the opposition was. I think Eddie Hearn has said in recent interviews on IFL and Boxing Social that Adam Azim wants soft touches in his fights and this, that, and the other. Well, if Adam Azim wants soft touches, what was Dalton Smith in with this past weekend is what I'd offer in return, because I don't know, but for winning that European title, I don't really know what it does for him, really. And like I said, just to reiterate, that's partly to do with Dalton Smith's talent, but it's also to do with the matchmaking there. But Dalton Smith moves on to, I guess, looking towards world title contention very soon. I think what stole the show, really, alongside Scotney against me and Mutu, was Scotney marching on and picking up more accolades. His Harry Scarf against Conor Walker, which looked for 6 minutes or so, or the last minute, whatever it was, but there was not that long left in the 12-round affair, and Conor Walker was being soundly outpointed and outbeaten by Harry Scarf, who is horrible by his moniker. He's a horrible fighter horrible fight to take on, horrible style to fight. But he's very efficient in the ring, very underrated with how strong he is as a ring general in the ring, especially at that type of level. Harry Scarf looked like he was going to boss his way to a victory, and then Conor Walker was able to land a big shot on the chin of Harry Scarf, and Harry, I guess, froze for a moment, and it led to a barrage of punches, and the referee saw fit to stop the fight, and Conor Walker picks up the British and Commonwealth titles. Credit to Conor Walker for sticking in with it and finding that shot. I do feel now, I will say that, look, I've only watched the highlights of this, and the highlights extend to the finish of the fight. But I feel like Harry Scarf was still in there and maybe could have been afforded maybe a little bit more time by the referee. I appreciate that he did take shots in there, but he was covering up. It seemed to be that he'd found his legs in that maelstrom against Conor Walker, but I don't know. Conor Walker moves on with a big victory. Ibrahim Sulaiman, look, I've seen a lot of Spider. He was voted by Matchroom boxing fans when they put out the poll as to who is their prospect of the year 2024. And you thought that Hamza Udin might have wrapped that up with his victories, even though he might have stuttered a little bit. Hamza Udin has still racked up some impressive victories higher up the chain, but Spider Sulaiman has been recognized for his style and talent, and he picked up that prospect of the year trophy. And I was reliably told as well that Matchroom had been beating the drum for Ibrahim Sulaiman on this card as well from the commentary team, and Spider picks up another points victory over 8 rounds, as does Hamza Udin. Trey Dewberry, so I'd like to make a mention of Trey Dewberry here as well. Trey is someone who I've seen do sessions whilst I'm in the gym as well. It's a cruiserweight. I like the look of his frame, looks good. Looks to be a powerful puncher, a powerful fighter, and it seemed like he was just going to get rid of his opponent after knocking him down. Maybe took his foot off the gas, maybe guilty of not stepping forward and stepping back, and stepping back was to his peril and his detriment, and that led to him taking a shot that he shouldn't take. I'm sure that he recognizes that and his team recognizes that. And a couple of kinks need to be ironed out with Trey, and I'm sure he'll be back. And at the least, but look, you've got to take those moments to capitalize on those opportunities and get those big highlight reel finishes. You didn't do that in this occasion, but you did show that you're TV friendly and entertaining. That might lead you to another opportunity. So that was that card in full and review. And Dalton Smith's been out. Adam Azim gets his chance to show himself this weekend. I'll be there this weekend to have a look at Adam Azim's response to Dalton Smith's offering this weekend.
I'm back.
Yeah, you are back, Danny. I should have brought you in.
No, it's all right. Yeah, I was there on Saturday night, not ringside because I was there as a fan, got my tickets from Ellie Scotney, whose performance I've already talked about. Just picking up on some of the stuff you were saying, I felt for Harry Scarf. I have to say, he dominated the first 10 rounds or so of that fight against Conor Walker. I actually saw Conor Walker in the hotel bar before the show. Seemed to be settling up something with the bar staff, like a bill or something. And I said at the time, God, I hope this doesn't cost him the fight. Like, obviously joking. And then he's like losing every round and was off the pace. And I thought, oh, maybe there was something more serious going on. But yeah, I mean, Harry Scarf probably won every minute of every round up until he got knocked out or stopped. I didn't have a major problem with the referee's final decision. So Harry Scarf was knocked down quite heavily, seemed disorientated. The referee could have stopped it after that. But he allowed him to continue. Predominantly, it seemed because Harry Scarf told him he was okay. So he asked Scarf to put his gloves up, which he didn't really do. He asked him to walk towards him, which he kind of stumbled a bit. And then he whispered in his ear, presumably asking him, if he was okay. Having that confirmed, he let it go on. So I thought, if anything, he was a bit too liberal rather than, too safety first. But either way, just a crazy win for Conor Walker, given everything that had gone before. And it was an interesting one because after the fight, the post-fight interview in the ring, Conor Walker said, everyone knows, we've seen that if you win the British title, which he did against Scarf, you can go to world level. And I thought, and in the nicest possible way, Dalton Smith winning the British title, given his amateur background and some of the people he's beaten as a pro, that does mean he can maybe make the leap to world level. Conor Walker's still got a bit to prove before we can say the same about him. His performance against Lewis Crocker was very good. His performance against Harry Scarf wasn't as good as that. But he did find a punch when he needed it most. Best punch of his career, no doubt, when he needed it the most. And that's a quality you can't teach. So congratulations to him. But yeah, Dalton Smith, that's the main man we're talking about in this segment. And he's not going to learn anything anymore, fighting the likes of Walid Ouiza. No disrespect to him, who was nominated for that European title, and it's fair enough. But you could tell from the moment he came out with his stiff shoulders and his unmoving hands that this wasn't going to last very long. And as Dalton said in the post-fight interview, he hurt him with the first punch that landed. And from there, he thought, well, I might as well put it on him. He was kind, Dalton, in that he said, well, I thought I might as well put it on him while he's cold. So, he hadn't warmed into the fight yet. But I think if he'd have put it on him at any point, if he'd have let it go to 2-3 rounds and then put it on him, the result would have been the same. But yeah, I mean, we now wait to see. He got that great win not too long ago. Was it Pedraza he beat? Yeah. So that was a good win at kind of fringe world level. We need to see him in more of those type of fights before progressing even more. Saw some of the names mentioned afterwards, likes of Liam Paro, who until recently was a world champion, and a few others. That's the fights we need to see Dalton in now. But one of the highlights for me of the whole night, as we're talking about 140-pound division, was the first time I'd seen the new advert for Matchroom DAZN starring Jack Catterall. They actually played it live in the arena. Oh my God. It was the funniest. Like, they turned the music down so you could hear it. Didn't need subtitles or anything. It's one of the funniest and best produced boxing adverts I've ever seen. Admittedly, that's a low bar, but it was so good. Like, Jack Catterall's quite a mild-mannered guy, but anyone who's interviewed him more than once knows that he has got quite a wry, kind of droll sense of humour. And that's on full display. I mean, he couldn't play the part any better. And for people that say, oh, he's just playing himself, he's not. That's not what he's like, really, in real life. But just incredible. And Sam Jones as a cameo, I think he overacted a little, Sam, if I'm honest. Nigel Travis pretty much does play himself. I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but if you can find it on social media, YouTube, Twitter, whatever, X, it's hilarious. Ayman, I know you're a fan. I saw you tweeted about it as well. Ayman?
Oh, I just lost you. Do you mind rewinding 20 seconds?
Yeah, sure. I was saying the advert featuring Jack Cat premiered, if you like, live at the venue on Saturday night in Nottingham. And I said, I know you're a fan of it as well, having tweeted about it. Right, it looks like Ayman's frozen now. I was waiting a while because I thought maybe it was me that was frozen. So yeah, take my word for it. The Jack Catterall advert. It's basically, the theme is that Jack Catterall's boring. Everyone keeps saying he's boring, and he tries to debunk that supposed myth while all the time reinforcing it. But it's kind of a variety of sketches. It's very, very funny, and I'd like to see more of that type of thing, as long as they pick the right boxer and the right thing. Is that the sound I can hear of Ayman clawing his way back? I thought I was the one frozen because you'd said you'd lost me, and then you were gone. A big question mark had replaced you. Some people in the chat were saying it was an improvement. I was having none of it. I said, we want someone who can answer the questions, not ask them.
It was punishment probably for the error. It was Zepeda, not Pedraza, that Dalton Smith had fought recently. But the point we were making was about Jack Catterall and that promo, that advert that Matchroom Boxing had curated. And what I'd like to say on it is, I think Matchroom Boxing gets lumped in, and sure, Eddie's the face of it all. And a lot of people kind of talk about Eddie and his promoting himself and maybe not the fighters sometimes, and maybe you can improve on that. I think this is a massive improvement on getting your fighters out there in a fun, innovative type of way, playing on a bit of a weakness of Jack Catterall and turning it into a strength and talking point. It was much in the vein. It's sort of been done before. I'm not trying to say Simpsons did it, but the Warrens did do it. Queensbury Promotions did do it with Joe Joyce, but they've done it in their own type of way here with Jack. And I think that's what's needed more from a promotional aspect, making these creative ideas, putting them to fruition with your fighters and really putting them at the forefront, because that's what leaves a lasting memory. That's what creates a character. That's what creates a moment or a memory outside of the limited amount of time you actually get to see a boxer in the ring and amongst the fight week events and then the actual fight. That's a limited and brief window. So if you can keep the thoughts in people's minds about that person as much as possible, then that's what these promotional videos are all for. And Matchroom had kind of been doing that a little bit. I remember they tried something around the Monte Carlo fight cards as well. Can't remember what director it was in the vein of, but they tried it in, I think it might have been Wes Anderson. They tried a promo video in a Wes Anderson type style, and that was fun. And I kind of marked the cards to see that Matchroom were upping their standards and quality of what they were doing. And this has led to them. The Bloodline one was really good. Sonny Edwards versus Galal Yafai. That was class as well. And in a very understated way. They didn't need to go and do all that much in creating a scenario or a moment like they did with Jack Catterall. They just needed to just tell the story in a very on the ground type of way. That was great. And then they've kept the momentum going on with this one. So I like to see more of it. I like to see more of other rival promotions seeing that and coming back with their own offerings as well. And what it means, and the bottom line is, it's not about Eddie Hearn, it's not about Frank Warren, it's not about Ben Shalom, it's not about Matchroom, it's not about Queensbury, it's not about Boxer. It's strictly about the fighters, and this purely elevates the fighters, and that's what it's down to. That's the bottom line if we're going for WWE references here. And more of that, much appreciated. And I thought this one for Catterall was brilliant.
Yeah, very much so. DB Coupon says the Jack Catterall advert is decent, to be fair. Turkey made everyone up their game. Zabanu Love says, are you going to zang, though, is the best bit of boxing promotion. I mean, there's a few. I know I said it was a low bar, but I suppose there are a few standouts. But yeah, the Jack Carroll one, I just wasn't expecting it. And then once it came on in the middle of the arena, I wasn't expecting it to be as good as it was either. So that was great. Before we move on to the final segment of this week's episode, we do have a poll out asking who should be Anthony Joshua's next opponent. The options are Dillian Whyte, Deontay Wilder, Martin Bakole, or the famous AN Other. If you do pick Other, please comment in the chat on who you think AJ should meet. But yeah, segment 4, there was someone actually in action, one of the world's best fighters pound for pound in action last week, and on a time that made it perfect in the UK to sit and watch him with a couple of crumpets, a sandwich, whatever your lunch choice is. And that was Naoya Inoue, who got a late, very understandably late opponent who did his best for maybe a round and then probably thought better of it and wished he was somewhere else. Ayman, did you watch the fight live?
Yes, I did watch it live. Yeah, I mean, his opponent, I think, what can you really do when you're in against a pound-for-pound level talent like Inoue and you're coming on such short notice? My kind of thoughts about the opponent more divert towards Sam Goodman, and maybe you can't do too much about a cut, but you're just the second opportunity to have that fight with Inoue. Maybe you try and do as much as you can to avoid those moments. And some people online questioning as to his desire to actually get in the ring with Inoue. I don't know, can't really say too much about that. But when it came down to fight night, Inoue does what he does best and just got him out there as soon as he possibly could. I thought it was a brilliant display from vintage, just pure vintage Naoya Inoue.
Yeah, and now thoughts turn to who could be next for Inoue. And we had an interview go up today. And Gareth seems pretty sure that if Nick Ball comes through against TJ Dehaney at the start of March, he will mark Naoya Inoue's first opponent up at featherweight, and that the belts will become vacant down at super bantam. Ball's been called in for the fight. He said he'd like to welcome Inoue to featherweight, and he doesn't mean with a bunch of flowers and a feast. So I think that's a great fight. I think in terms of their styles, it screams action. Most people agree that if Inoue is going to lose anytime soon, it will be because he fights someone who's too naturally big for him. Now, we know Nick Ball's not the tallest, but he is one of the strongest featherweights out there. He's got a very compact, muscular physique, and he's incredibly fit as well. So it's constant pressure style that he employs. Ayman, what sort of chance do you give Nick Ball and the weight itself of defeating Inoue?
I do give Nick Ball a chance. My reservations with Nick are, firstly, I would like to know where the fight is happening. It's been mooted that the fight could potentially happen. Inoue is going to fight in America and Riyadh. I don't know if there's been a timeline put on to which one's first and which one's after. But I'd like to know where the fight is happening. With the fight not happening in Japan, I feel like that's probably a less of an acclimatization problem from a Nick Ball perspective than it would be an out of home turf for Naoya Inoue. And I think those sort of things do add up on fight nights. But I think for me, whilst Nick Ball might have that weight advantage, I don't know how much he's able to make it tell, because my reservations about Nick Ball are, I think he's an explosive puncher. I think he's exciting to watch. And his power does carry towards the later part of the fights as well. But his variation is something that I think isn't there yet, his variation in punches. And that was no more evident than in his last fight in Liverpool. And I want to see against Dehaney him vary up and try and outfox his opponent to find those gaps in his defense. Because Dehaney, although he come out with a defeat, and some might mock him for an apparent quit in the ring, the injury and whatsoever, and
including Nick Ball,
Nick Ball, and Seconds Out can feel very much responsible for getting this fight over the line as well too.
You're welcome, TJ, for the purse.
Yeah, exactly. Dehaney will feel confident in that. Sure, he might be the older fighter. Sure, he might be not at the peak of his powers, but he was able to have success against a pound-for-pound level talent before it ended so abruptly. And he will feel that, from his perspective, Nick Ball is lower down that chain, a bit more raw, a bit more rudimentary than Naoya Inoue was, and he can still use the movement that he's got and still outfox Nick Ball into a points decision victory, or maybe even more on the night. And that's how Dehaney will feel going into this. So I feel that from Nick, he needs to vary up a lot of his offense and his defense as well. He takes a lot of shots where he doesn't need to, because I think Nick, once he knows he can take a shot, he'll just walk through him, and that's to his detriment. And against Inoue, that needs to be razor sharp, those defense, because before you get your offense off, if your defense isn't there, then Inoue has shown that he'll find you out, and he's got that big punch to find it out. So whether it translates, that first shot, you would think that they've looked at the champions and said Nick Ball's probably, with respect in the context of the champions, the least difficult challenge. That's not to downplay how good Nick Ball is, but that's the way I think they'll have looked at it, especially with the other fighters being a lot taller than Nick Ball is, and that presents its own problems as well. They'll have looked at that and said, look, if you're going to work at this new weight, this is the guy to go with first. So he's got a real opportunity. If that weight is going to be a factor, then he can make it count on the night. But I think it's still, you'd have to make Inoue a real good favourite in the fight.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see Inoue against that style, like someone who's going to be constantly on his chest, throwing punches, trying to maul him around, wrestle him a little bit. Because Inoue's an excellent fighter, but the more space you give him, the more time you give him, the more effective he is. I mean, that's the same for most fighters, I suppose. But some thrive off that level of activity. Their fists are blur, leaning their head on the shoulder of their opponent and just wailing away to head and body, uppercuts as well on the inside. And Nick Ball's one of those fighters. He's naturally aggressive, determined, super fit to go to 12 rounds as well. And I think he can take a shot, but as Ayman pointed out there, he's proved that far too many times. I think he was a class amateur, Nick Ball, and I think he's a compact fighter as well. He keeps his shape. So I think he can be a lot more defensively adept than he's shown so far. I think, as Ayman said, he likes having a tear up. And if he feels that he's going to come out on top under those circumstances, he won't worry too much about what's coming back at him. Whereas with Inoue, I mean, we wait and see if he carries that power up to featherweight, but you assume he will. He has so far. Then he does need to be a bit more on his P's and Q's, to quote Kano there. But yeah, we shall see. But it's a fight I'd really like to see. So no offense to TJ Dehaney, but hopefully Nick Ball comes through that test, because no one's going to be screaming from the rooftops for Dehaney rematch with Inoue, with all due respect. Guys, before we leave, we need to give you the result of the poll. We asked you at the start of the show, who should Anthony Joshua fight next? And we gave you the options of Dillian Whyte, Martin Bakole, Deontay Wilder, or other. Please comment. And we haven't had many comments, which makes sense because other got a whopping 6% of the vote. In third place, we did it in reverse order. We got no drum roll, unless Modfather Vinny can whip one up, which is unlikely at this short notice. Dillian White got 12%, lagging right behind. It was quite a tussle between the top two, though. And quite a surprise for me that the chat went for Martin Bakole in second place with 37%. The majority of the chat, 43% in this case, want to see Anthony Joshua fight Deontay Wilder, which Ayman and I didn't have a massive interest in, but it shows we're not influencers, I suppose. But yeah, Deontay Wilder has come out on top. Ayman, are you surprised?
No, I'm not overly surprised, just because it's been an idea for many, many years. And I think people just want to see this get over the line and actually see it with their own eyes, as opposed to have this one put on the pile of ones that we never got to see on a fight night. I think Martin Bakole hasn't really been a rival for Anthony Joshua outside of Billy Nelson shouting for Martin Bakole versus Anthony Joshua, and a few others as well. Look, there's a lot of respect towards Martin Bakole and what he can do and the opportunities that he should have. But Deontay Wilder has been ahead in the queue in people's minds for many, many years, and that's what will take him over the post. And maybe there's a bit of thinking there with a bit of matchmaking as well from some of the boxing fans here, who know that maybe Joshua, if he's going to get back to the top, maybe needs something a little less heavier, fighter with a little less momentum than someone like a Martin Bakole. And Deontay Wilder figures to be that guy over Bakole. And White hasn't shown or hasn't picked up any momentum in his fights that he's had recently.
DB Cooper one says, Kano, wow, never had you down as a man of culture, Mr. Flexen. Love Kano, huge boxing fan too. Yeah, I met him at a show, York Hall. Kevin Mitchell was headlining, so that must have been over 10 years ago. No offense, Kev. And yeah, he was loving the boxing. He was happy to talk to everyone about his music and about Top Boy and so on. So yeah, seems like a really cool guy. Doesn't follow me on X though, unlike Ashley Waters. So, you know, I'm a bigger fan of Asher D, I'm afraid. But yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. Please do give us a thumbs up and a subscribe if you haven't already. If you're watching on playback rather than live, please do comment because we'll respond to some of those as well. But as is always the case, the final remarks goes to my co-host, Mr. Ayman Khan.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining this week's iteration of Seconds Out Live episode. Seconds Out Live. We of course couldn't do this without you and your contributions in the comments. So thank you so much for those contributions in the comment section. Thank you for your like button, smashing the like button, subscribing as well too. Every little bit does help, and we will be bringing you the latest in boxing breaking news and developments from this week. I'll be out in the field, hopefully speaking to Michael Conlon, who's decided to sign with Wasserman Boxing, continuing on his career. And also I'll be on top of all the action from the Azim versus Lipinets fight week. So looking forward to that. So if you haven't already, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. But for this weekend's episode, thank you so much thank you so much to listen to Seconds Out Live this week. Flubbing. These flubs are just chipping their way in, Danny, aren't they? I've got to make sure I'm on top of these.
You'll be in a field soon, so that will sort it out.
Yeah, I'll be in the field and eating the grass the way I'm chatting on. But thank you to Danny. Thank you to the listeners. Thank you to Vinny as well, too. And we'll see you next week.